unlocking talent, capacity in trusts. We've had a really good morning, I think, two really productive sessions. I hope you found them valuable. And yeah, now we're going to start with the third session. And the third session is looking at culture, and particularly culture within performance management. The session is going to be led by myself and Yanis. Yanis is one of the co-founders of Ajurio, has been alongside Ernest working on building this company for the past few years, and has been heavily involved in considering how culture can influence the kind of success or not of a company as it grows and as it kind of goes about its day to day. So Yanis will talk to you for a little while about culture and performance management, and then we'll have a little chat between the two of us. But I will encourage everybody throughout the session to post questions in the chat, or anything that you'd like to share. If you've got some kind of good stories from your organisation that you think that others could benefit from, please do post within the chat throughout the session, and we will discuss as a group at the end. So with that, Yanis, I will pass over to you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Iona. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. And we will be touching on some of the themes from the first half of the day. In particular, we'll be thinking about what we as leaders, as HR professionals, can be doing in a very practical sense to make the organizations we're leading and the organizations we're shaping to be organizations that people want to stick with, that staff want to remain at, that we can recruit and retain a team around. So that's the link, and we will be looking at four things in this session. So first, an overview of why culture is worth speaking about, and trying to define what we mean when we talk about culture, because organizational culture is one of those words that is quite quite prevalent, but at the same time quite difficult to pin down. Then we will look at the very practical structures and how the organizational processes, how we shape those, and how that's deeply linked with culture. Then we'll zoom in on performance management, as Iona already mentioned. So how do we align our organizational culture and the performance management structures that we have? And finally, how do we manage cultural improvement? So culture isn't a static thing. Culture is something that we can change. So we'll be looking at these four topics in today's session. And again, as Iona mentioned, really, really keen to see your comments and feedback and questions in the chat or in the questions and answer session afterwards. Without further ado, we in Ajurio, we've been thinking about culture for quite a while, and we've worked with schools and school trusts on culture with particular aspects of it in mind before. So we've released papers previously on cultural due diligence. So what happens with organizational culture in trust mergers. We've worked on culture-driven recruitment as well. So thinking about how do we use and communicate our organization's values and culture in the recruitment process. But all of these ideas are linked with the idea, with the core idea that our ethos, our culture, is something that is worth thinking about strategically. So what we mean by that is there's a few benefits to think about culture in a strategic way rather than allowing it to free float in an organization. One is the aspect of well-being, the aspect of clarity of mission and vision. If we have a clear idea of why we are in the organization, why we do the things we do in the way that we do, there is a clear link with well-being. The second one, it's and this is something where we've seen some correlation in the data sets that we have, is the link between strong relationships and a strong company culture, a strong organizational culture, and retention. So again, thinking about the staff that enjoy their work and have and build and an organization that builds a strong culture, there is that link with retention. And finally, external research has shown that there is a link between strong cultures and performance. So research done by McKinsey has shown that link as well. So when we think about this, there is that I really like to think about it in terms that culture provides some guidance for us, for our teams, and some sense of meaning and purpose when there's a high degree of complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity. So when things are as usual, when we can, regulate our way around a situation, when things are fairly typical, we just can rely on our role descriptions, or we can rely on our structures and processes. But culture comes into play when we have this high ambiguity, high complexity, high uncertainty as a guiding light for our organization, strengthening well-being, strengthening retention, and strengthening performance. So, and again, I've kept the word culture quite ambiguous itself in this introduction. Now let's move to what we understand by culture. So this is the old definition, the good old definition of culture being how we do things around here, but we like to break it down into three subcomponents. Values, so the justification of why we do the things that we do. Behaviors, so how those values translate into individual behaviors, so how individuals act. And finally, we talk about structures, so organizational processes and organizational elements that define our organizations as entities. So values, behaviors, and structures. Let's talk through these with a bit more depth. So values are the foundational elements. They answer the question why we choose to do a certain thing. So they are the core principles behind the decisions, behind the behaviors, behind the structures that we choose. And most of our schools and school trusts, if we take a short moment to look around the lobby of or the reception area of a school, or if we go and visit a trust website, it's likely that we'll find the values listed somewhere. So these are clarity on these is quite widespread. And that is very, very encouraging, because this is really the foundational element. Because if you don't have clarity around what you value, so whether honesty is a guiding principle, whether equity, whether inclusion is something that you want to prioritize over other things, that makes things quite difficult. Behaviors then are how these elements of how these values find their way into individual practice. If I say honesty as a value, there's a dozen different ways of what that might mean in practice. It might mean being more confrontational. It might mean being quite inclusive and being honest about the good things. Honesty, there's a lot of room for interpretation when we talk about values, but behaviors, if we want to clarify what exactly the behaviors are that we expect our teachers to do, what we expect of our pupils, what we expect of ourselves, those are that's the way to make the value element more concrete. And we wrote about this in context of recruitment, and the report is available online on culture-driven recruitment. So the culture-driven recruitment idea is, if we can formulate the behaviors, we can ask questions about these behaviors, and we can introduce this into our hiring practice. So there we have behaviors as an element. And finally, the third component is the structures. The structures being the policies and processes that support your values. So there's individual behaviors, but also there's things that the organization itself, the school or the trust, can do. So what do you talk about in assemblies? What do you do on your inset days? What's your support policy? What's your professional development policy? All of this is also something that can be strengthened and that can express your organization's values. And this part on the structures, that's where this is the part that we'll examine in slightly more depth. And this is the part where professional development comes in. But just to reiterate, we have values, we have individual behaviors, and we have organizational structures as components of culture, and values being the basis for behaviors and structures. So you can look at the Capture Your Culture workshop instructions. That's part of the cultural due diligence package. You can look at how the behaviors interact with recruitment in our culture-driven recruitment report. And finally, the principle that we'll explore a bit more now is aligning your structures with your values. So making sure that your policies are in alignment with your values to avoid unnecessary friction. And we'll explore that now. So how do we begin looking at organizational structures? How do we explore this further? We'll have a look at how the organization is structured by looking at some power hierarchies. So things like schemes of delegation, who's responsible for what, how are decisions made. So whenever there's an extraordinary situation, what's the process to look at that? How are goals set, and how are expectations set, and what's the performance management? So all of this is a complex web of policies and processes, but to make navigating it easier, we'll have a look at a framework provided by Charles Handy. Charles Handy is a management writer who's done quite a bit of work on organizational culture and organizations as such. He's done quite a bit of work on schools as organizations as well. And he describes 4 kinds of organizational structures: power structures, role structures, task structures, and people structures. And it's worth keeping in mind that these are archetypes. These are sort of categories to make our concepts clearer. These are not horoscopes, so we don't expect you to find one of these that describes your organization spot on and then ignore the rest. It's likely going to be a mix of these, but by exploring these 4 categories of organizations that exist, we can find some insight on how to avoid that friction between your organizational values and your processes, like your performance management process. So let's explore all 4 of these for a moment. Power structures. Let's start with power structures that are very, very often the very first structure that an organization sees, which is a structure that's driven by strong leaders, like a head teacher for a school, or an executive head for a trust, a leader with their relationships, with their personal vision, with their personal drive being the core driver of the organization. And there's limited need for bureaucracy. It is driven by these personal relationships. The illustration suggests that there is a strong power center, so the decisions very often are made centrally by these strong leaders, and the vision and the values are shaped around that. And we can see these cultures, these structures, really moving rapidly in face of a crisis, where strong leaders can rapidly turn around a school or a trust in a crisis situation like we saw in a pandemic. It is very dependent on the leader. It can become a bit autocratic. So that is the con, and it doesn't scale very well. So as soon as you're entering a certain size of a school or certain size of a trust, there's only so many personal relationships that a single leader can cultivate. So the power structure is one way to organize your organization. The second, quite different to that, is the role structure. The role structure for Handy is a structure that's driven by a job description. So you know what you've signed up to do, you know what's in your job brief, you know who's managing you, you know who are you managing, you know effectively this is a very high bureaucracy, high structure, high stability way of organizing work. There is a clear chain of command. There is everybody's taking care of their own little piece of work. And again, this is something that can be scaled quite well. So if you're managing a dozen schools, if this is about, if you see that the processes and the structures you're setting up are very, very sort of scalable, it's likely to be a role structure. And again, it removes a lot of that ambiguity with staff members not needing to think about what's going to happen next. It provides a lot of stability. With stability comes a certain slowness to change, because if everything's clearly regulated, if there are bureaucratic structures, that's something that takes time to change, and silos can emerge. So each school or each department operating on their own little field separately from the others. The third of four structures is the task structure that is driven by the task at hand, where regardless of your position, regardless of what you're doing, you have a project, you assemble a group of experts for that project. They go and deliver results, creating structures on the way for achieving that particular result. So your task forces. And if a company if this structure is deeply embedded, you'll see a lot of change as the goal changes. You'll see a lot of delivery and even an obsessive quality for delivering the results for that particular project. And you'll see limited bureaucracy emerging. Again, this is setting task by task expertise. So again, this is great for achieving one-off results. So if this is a situation where a turnaround project is required, having this sort of a task force approach is great. But again, thinking about scale and thinking about stability, this gives a lot of uncertainty because every project will be different, and this is a sort of a serial one-off approach. And finally, people structures. Very often and this is the toughest to manage structure, where it is solely driven by individuals that are in the organization because they believe that that's the best way for them to practice their own craft, their own gains, effectively caring less about the organization, less about the shared vision, and more about their own individual vision. So if you imagine, and there's very few organizations that will be organized in this way. There will be some artists collectives or craftsmen's collectives, but you might have individuals that have this as the dominant way of thinking, of structuring their own thoughts and preferences. For instance, teachers that are so focused on their own craft as professionals that any organization-wide initiative is more of an obstacle or something that is a matter of annoyance rather than something to participate in. So again, it enables individual goals marvelously, but thinking from a leadership or management perspective, this almost voluntary assemblage is just quite difficult to manage and steer as an organization rather than a collective of individuals. Sort of without persuading each individual separately, it is quite tough to manage. So why talk about these four structures? Why talk about power structures, role structures, task and people structures? So first, it's worthwhile to acknowledge that especially in trusts, in school trusts, you will see different schools and different teams in your organization gravitating towards different cultures and different structures. So you will be thinking about some parts operating on a task-by-task environment, some parts operating in a very structured hierarchical environment, and in some schools you'll see a strong leader, a strong head, setting the vision and setting and building structures around that. So this is again something that as we're working across all of these at the same time, this sort of mapping where we see which archetype dominates allows us to identify where we expect some friction to happen if we are shifting towards one or the other, and we can look out for unnecessary friction in this way. So again, unnecessary friction is the key word here, because some friction will always be necessary as we shape and mold the culture of the organization. So now let's look at this theoretical framework from a very practical way through the lens of performance management. So imagine you set a clear set of key performance indicators, progress scores, attendance scores, anything, for each team member, for each term, and you have a discussion with an HR partner about this in your organization. Imagine this for an organization that is very role-focused, where stability and predictability is key, versus an organization that's task-oriented, where we shift our focus from change project to change project. There will be a lot more friction in this approach to performance management in the task-oriented one rather than a role-oriented one. So let's have a look at what performance management structures might work best with some overall culture archetypes, and what structures might work in a poorer way. So with power structures, where the leaders are the ones exerting just a lot of influence and giving a lot of guidance, having a performance management framework that excludes the leaders, that doesn't allow direct contact with the leaders, is something that potentially might be worth avoiding. That isn't the most efficient way of going about things. So if it is about the leadership's vision, then using elements like one-on-ones to strengthen the relationship with the leaders themselves is a way to go to cultivate this. For role structures, again, if people like that's the stability of For role structures, using predictable tools like, again, dashboards, performance indicators, annual growth plans, something that is clearly regulated, where you know well in advance what the expectations are. Again, that is something that will cause the least amount of friction. For task structures, these require the most flexibility. So adaptability to each task and each project at hand is key when we're thinking about performance management structures for task-oriented organizations. Also, for task-oriented organizations, as the outcomes are the critical element, expert feedback, rather than necessarily line management feedback or leadership feedback, expert feedback is the one that's appreciated the most, that is the most beneficial for people who've bought into a task-oriented structure. And finally, with people structures, for those individuals that are there, a part of your school, a part of your organization, because that's the best way to facilitate their own personal ambitions. For them, again, using that facilitator approach and the persuasion approach, saying that it's worth participating in these overall organization-wide, school-wide, trust-wide projects, because it will facilitate, it will make you better as a professional. That is the way to go there in that direction. So again, this is a tough thing to map, because first, we know that performance management structures will be connected with your organizational culture. So we know that introducing company-wide dashboards is a reflection of your culture, and it will shape your organization towards a more role-oriented one, away from the other kinds. So we will have some friction, because we will never have uniform culture within an organization. So deciding where you want that friction, where do you want the organization to go? Do you want to cultivate agility and being able to move from project to project? Do you want to cultivate scalability and being able to replicate the same model again and again? Some of these things are worth introducing a bit of friction around. So if you want to use it strategically, identify where you want to be, what are your values, what are your core sort of tenets of your organization, and build a performance management structure that is aligned with that and supports that, even if there's a bit of friction there. But unnecessary friction, so a friction that takes you not in the direction you want to go, but still causes some tensions, that is something to avoid. And finally, and this is again just on a pragmatic note, when thinking about performance management, it's worth accepting that rollout of a new initiative, of a new performance management approach will be uneven, because again, you will not have a uniform culture in an organization, almost never. You will have areas that will embrace it and go, this is the best thing. This gives me clarity, this gives me goals, this gives me a clear sense of direction. And you'll have other people going, oh no, you are trying to control me. Why are you doing this? So knowing that, you shouldn't expect a uniform sort of uniformly successful rollout. You will see pockets of friction and pockets of resistance. That is absolutely natural. And if you know why, if you have a hypothesis of why that friction exists, and if you can again say to yourself, this friction is worth having, again, that just makes your work that much easier if you're thinking about performance management structures. So this is how performance management structures are linked with your organizational culture in general. Our final topic for today, for the last 10 minutes, before we turn to questions and answers, we'll have a look at how do we use this to shape the culture of the organization. So we just looked at how we shape the performance management tools, but how do we improve culture? And we have two ways to group this. We can look at how we shape individual level behaviors and how we look at the organizational level cultural health. And it all has to do with setting expectations, supporting and measuring progress, and rewarding good practice. So these are the sort of core ingredients for cultural shift. For setting cultural expectations, communication and clarity is not to be underestimated. There is one thing is doing a workshop once, putting values in large bold letters in your school's reception, and then forgetting about it. But the other aspect of it, that is a necessary step. Knowing where your values are, being able to name them, referring to them constantly, over communicating them to each individual, to the organization itself, revisiting that, because again, there will be drift, there will be shift. In Edurio, we in 2016 we ran a workshop where we identified 5 key values of the company. 4 years later, it had dwindled down to 2. 3 were forgotten, not implemented, sort of drifted away. 2 were robust, that we are still proud to name part of our core values at this moment. So be prepared that culture and your values will shift, and communicate them constantly. Very, very accurate, Ernest. Exactly. When you're absolutely bored of saying it, others will start hearing it. Over communication is key. The second part of setting expectations is using onboarding to clarify culture. So recruitment and onboarding is vital. You spend a lot of time talking about what the expectations are around the job role, about the requirements, etc. Setting expectations for culture and individual behaviors is another. Onboarding is a brilliant opportunity to do that. And finally, for leaders, it is absolutely vital to model those and live those behaviors, live those values. Because if you're paying lip service to a value and you're not acting in accordance to that, that is the model that you will be providing. So you can easily expect others to follow that model, and also pay a lot of lip service to your values and not live according to them. So modeling is a very, very strong and clear way of setting expectations. Then, once you've had those expectations set, let's think about supporting and measuring progress. So how do we support and measure cultural progress? One is if you already have some structures around the culture and behavior, around performance management, you can do and add culture to those conversations. I might have frozen there.
We can still hear you.
Sorry?
We can still hear you.
Oh, brilliant. Can you see me as well?
Can see you and can see the slide that says supporting and measuring progress.
Perfect. I think my Zoom has reached its capacity. So so for individuals, culture and behavior, just add that as a topic to your one-on-ones, to your annual reviews. If you're doing annual reviews, to your 360, just have that as a part of a conversation, so that most importantly, it's not about the manager looking into that. Most important part of that is adding room for self-reflection. So each individual thinks about their own behavior, thinks about their own participation in terms of culture. And as always, providing and asking feedback about behaviors and cultures. So asking, are we living, am I living my professional life in accordance to this or that value, is another case. The other element is, for organization as a whole, you can think of a proxy metric for your cultural health. So for instance, if you're really, really keen on punctuality, then following the attendance metrics for pupils actually makes sense as a proxy metric of how well we're doing. Same with running a culture survey. That's a more direct way of capturing your culture, your cultural health. We currently have some questions around it in our staff experience survey, some questions about the trust's vision and values, but a more targeted survey around the culture is another way to measure progress then. Finally, we can look at rewarding good practice. We can look at rewarding good practice. We can call out great examples of behaviors that where people have acted in accordance to our values. If somebody is acting in a particularly ambitious way, and your value is ambition, or has demonstrated honesty and truthfulness, where those are your values, using opportunities in assemblies, in newsletters, in staff meetings to just call these out as positive examples. They're thinking about cultural change. There is no greater reward for cultural change than social reward, so social recognition, and that is something to keep in mind. And the same applies for organizations. And I'm back to communication. Once you have those proxy metrics, once you have got your well-being scores or attendance scores, or if you're focusing on academic achievement results, communicating them in terms of, this is an example of why we hold these values. Same with the survey results, just communicating them very, very clearly to your team. Just allows the team to feel a shared pride in the values, a shared sense of belonging to the same organization and to the same structures. So thinking about cultural improvement, we looked at setting clear expectations, supporting and measuring progress, and rewarding good practice. And again, clarity on your values. So clarity on what you want, a short list of what you want your team to focus on, what you want to set your expectations around, measure, and then reward. That is the sort of the foundation on to which the rest is built. So we've had a brief look at what is culture. So thinking about values, behaviors, and structures. We saw the tight link between structures and culture. So how values of different sorts can create different structures. And we saw how we align culture and performance management, in this way. We also saw that we can manage cultural improvement in an organization through setting expectations, through supporting and measuring cultural metrics, and through rewarding good practice. And again, we've been publishing quite a bit around that. I saw Jurgis already dropped the link to 2 of our reports, and we are about to develop a set of tools to help school trusts shape their culture proactively and strategically. So we're looking to understand trust needs better on this. So if you'd be keen to take part in this, somebody will drop a line in the chat or just reach out to me, because we will be just wanting to have a conversation about how you approach culture in your school, just so we understand where we can add most value in understanding your culture, in giving you the tools to improve it and to strengthen it. Thanks. Would love to chat with you afterwards, but now I'll hand over to you, Iona, and questions.
Thank you very much, Yanis. And yeah, I've just dropped the link in the chat. So if you are keen to talk to us about what you're doing within your organisation, do either email Yanis or fill out the details in that link. But I'd also encourage anyone on the line who has something interesting to share with the group today. Please do either write a little note in the comments, or if you put your hand up, not literally, because I might not be able to see you if you're not on the first few pictures in the screen, but if you use the reaction button to put your hand up, just like I've done there, then we can call on you in the session as well. If you don't want to talk on camera, then feel free just to put a note in the chat, or as we say, follow up with us afterwards. But yeah, starting, Yanis, do you want to stop sharing so we can so we can have a proper chat?
I'll give it a shot. Again, my Zoom's unfortunately frozen. So
we worked. So I think it seems to be okay, even though you can't see that. But yes. So yeah, let's start the conversation. Do write notes in the chat as we go. But let's start. Yanis, I liked the way you talked there about how the culture can influence the structures, and how the structures can influence the culture. And I think that's a really neat way of thinking about it. And obviously the structure that we've been talking about most prominently today is performance management structures. And I'm curious because you mentioned about these different types of structures and how there is rarely a one size fits all. It's unlikely that one organization will have one structure and one structure only. So how do we make sure that we're using the right policy and in a mixed environment? And how do we make sure that we're kind of rewarding the right things if we've got a mixture of both role and task cultures, but we've got a role-centric performance management approach? How do we ensure that those who are more involved in task-oriented things are not kind of being penalized or unrecognized for things that they're doing which should be recognized?
I think that is the question of that. I kept referring to friction is central to this. So figuring out first, if your assumption is that it's absolutely okay that there will be a more innovation-oriented, project-oriented group, and there will be a role-oriented group in your trust or in your school. Being flexible is the first case. So if you can not apply a one-size-fits-all performance management structure, if you have the privilege of and the time to be able to adapt to each subgroup's individual demands, I think that is the best way forward. That, of course, takes a lot of work. If that isn't an option, then identifying where your organization is heading. So where do you see a gap emerging? Are you expecting more work, more challenges to come on the scaling front, on the establishing stability front, or are you seeing more challenges at the moment in being able to adapt to different situations? So that making that choice first, and then saying, okay, that means we're going for performance management structure A or B. It's just about making that choice mindfully rather than at random, and understanding that, okay, there will be this additional friction, then there will be this additional tension, but it's worth it. So either giving that flexibility in the first place, or if you have to choose just one, then choosing it mindfully based on where you want to take the organization's culture in the long term, or at least in the medium term.
Thank you very much. And we've had a question in the chat from Haroop. She mentions around pay transparency and pay policy, and how do we make sure that there's kind of that's aligned with our culture as an organization, and what do leaders need to pay attention to when thinking about that?
So with pay transparency, I think the difficult bit around pay transparency is, as with any policy, is introducing it, and introducing it especially to people that aren't used to talking about pay, that aren't used to these areas. So and again, this is where we I can only share the experience from us as Edurio when we introduced the open the pay transparency. We were in a very early stage as an organization, and people were already quite bought in the honesty and transparency as core principles. So we had that foundational buy-in. So it felt like a logical step for us, but again, if that initial foundation is missing, if there is some mistrust, then first working to know that this is a safe environment, we can trust each other, and doing explanatory work that this is why we're doing this and what we're trying to achieve from this is vital. So again, ensure that the sort of foundational principles of why you're doing this, what values does this represent, why does organization believe this is a good thing, so establishing those values first, and then the processes, the structures come afterwards. I hope that answers your question.
I can imagine that being an area that is ripe for the friction that you've been talking about. But as you say, yeah, thinking about it deliberately and kind of leaning into that, I think is going to be really, really important. On the subject of kind of leadership, what would you recommend to somebody who is in a position of some influence within an organization, but is not the one who is kind of has the final say on policies or has the final say on where we're going? If you're somebody like that and you are fully bought into the idea of bringing culture into these different strategic areas, including kind of performance management policy and so on, if you're fully bought in but you know that your leaders aren't, how can you make the case for putting culture at the heart of these decision making?
I think I mean, that is a very tricky scenario to navigate. That is a really, really difficult scenario to navigate. There is no easy answer in those situations, especially if the leaders model a behavior that this is unimportant. This is if the leaders are actively sort of scorning these approaches, that can be sort of an insurmountable obstacle. But at the same time, thinking about these sort of navigating these power hierarchies, persuasion is very often the best the best tool at our disposal. So persuading the leaders that the goals that the vision they're striving for will be supported by having a strategic approach to how we do performance management, how we think about culture, how we think about the organizational development in the first place. So persuasion, and again, there's a lot of work out there on the importance of culture. So again, thinking about it in terms of well-being, thinking about it in terms of motivation, thinking about it in terms of performance, thinking about it in terms of retention. There's enough of a case to be made. So persuading and getting the leaders on board is I think the best scenario here. But it is an unenviable situation if you're mandated with thinking about this and the leadership is not bought in. So I think there's a very tough situation to navigate.
Thank you. And Ernest has posed a question which is almost is in the same vein. It's around kind of the resistance. How possible is it to change the culture of an organization without changing the team? And the example he gives is a situation where a school has joined a trust where the approaches might be quite different. How do you ensure that you are able to, as you say, kind of manage the culture of the individuals within that, if it is in a structure which is kind of has clashes built in?
And here there will be people with deeply held preferences and deeply held beliefs, and if I've spoken with a trust that's merged with another trust where both trusts pre-merger had radically different approaches to decision making. One was a lot of autonomy to the schools in the driver's seat, and the other trust with schools looking towards the trust central management, trust central leadership team about what to do in this or that scenario. So what to do in this situation, if those are really deeply held beliefs, if those are, if there is that, there will be situations where it's just a mismatch. So in this case, it would have been ideal to identify this mismatch during the merger process, so doing cultural due diligence, but in some cases it's not, it cannot be overcome, but with a gradual explanation. So again, carrying out a shared cultural, creating a shared cultural vision. So rather than saying, okay, this is your new culture now, these are your new values now, adapt or leave, creating a new vision, a shared vision in this new organization would be a much better starting point. And from then on out, reinforcing that shared new vision through communicating clear expectations around individual behaviors, and then sort of strategically choosing the right processes and structures. So as we saw with performance management, if you want to your organization to be more role oriented, you can slowly drip feed more and more of this structure in your performance management processes, and that will gradually change the culture as well. So to summarize, first, try and not be in that situation in the first place by hiring people that can strengthen your organization's culture, and by doing a due diligence on this before a merger. If you are in that situation, rather than forcing your preconceptions on others, try and build a new consensus, and then gradually, strategically sort of set expectations around structures and behaviors that lead towards this new consensus.
Thank you very much. And noting we've got 5 minutes left, I think we'll aim to finish the discussion on culture at 29 past so that we can start the next session on time, but not noting any further questions in the chat. I just have one final one. Please do, if you have any last questions, please do put them in. But Yanis, you talked about the importance of understanding what your culture really is, and you mentioned a kind of culture survey. I know we've covered in some of our previous work how you go about actually truly understanding what your culture is. Could you just do a kind of maximum 4-minute summary of how to go about capturing your culture and making sure you are truly understanding who you are as an organization?
I think there's two elements that we really recommend to carry out when you're doing understanding your culture. First is element number one is listening to capturing as many voices as possible, in a staff meeting, in an insight day, in an online survey, asking a few targeted questions about where each staff member's values are. This can also be applied to pupils and parents, but as this group is oriented towards staff is a great start. So first, capturing with a few key questions, what do we expect from each other as colleagues? What do we want to be recognized as by our peers from other places, by the parents? What's the perception we want to leave? What are our values? So identifying that, and that will give you a huge block of qualitative information about how each individual sees this differently. And then the second part of that work is a curation work, where the work of leaders is to identify what elements of what values are already widespread in the organization, what are some core values, and what values are aspirational. So what values do we see little pockets of, but we'd like them to be sort of more widespread in the organization. So and then once you have this sort of idea there, you can communicate that. Once you've done the curation, you can communicate that, talk through that, and clarify that further. So again, capturing as wide a range of views about your values, then doing some curation, and communicating the outcomes. And again, there's a detailed instruction of how to do that in a workshop in one of our previous reports on culture. So if you want to carry out a Discover Your Culture workshop, the instructions are available.
Thank you very much. And 2 minutes left and no further questions. So I'll just once again pop that link in for anybody who has things they'd like to share with us on what it is you're doing with culture in your organisation. We, as Yanis has said, we've got a range of different areas where we're kind of pointing culture at, so putting culture at the heart of different strategic priorities. We'd love to talk to you about other areas where you're thinking about culture and other areas where that is being applied. So I'm just popping that link in there again. If you could, if you have something you'd like to share, please do let us know, or you can email Yanis. He did share his email address and we can pop that in again for anybody who missed it. But with that, I think we can wrap up this session. We've got one more session to go, where we'll have Ernest and some of our other colleagues at Adurio having a chat with Mandy Coulter about the future of research. But for now, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Yanis, for your time. And yeah, on to the next session, and over to you, Ernest.